sometimes think to myself that the last session on Saturday afternoon is weeding out the wheat from the chaff. You've got to really want it to be here. Which is one of the reasons why this year we're not going to have a formal lecture session. Rather than have another 40-minute presentation on something that could be very fascinating, interesting, and important, I thought we should talk about all of the fascinating, interesting, and important things we've already touched on over the course of last night and this morning's program. I wanted to begin introducing this session by relaying a conversation that Karen and I had some months ago when we were discussing what she would talk about for this, her colloquium presentation.
We kind of got into it.
And we did get into it a bit during the session, in fact. The question was, and this is something, again, we want to face reality, when we want to ask the hard questions, we have to say the truth. There is a generational divide when it comes to speaking about gay and lesbian, bisexual, and transgender, or LGBT issues. Younger people tend to be much more comfortable with the subject. Older people tend to be less comfortable with the subject. It's been a generational transition. And the question was I bringing Karen here to simply talk about diverse Jewish identities, or would she talk about herself? Would she talk about the work that is her passion, this work with Jewish Mosaic and creating a more welcoming Jewish community for diverse Jewish identities, including diverse sexual identities? I suggested to her that maybe she could tone it down a bit. And she said, Adam, I'm sorry, that's BS. Except she didn't say BS. And we talked about it, and I realized that on some level, I wasn't giving you credit enough. That our audience can handle it. We can handle being uncomfortable. After all, we make other people uncomfortable all the time by considering who we are. But even more important, even if it does make us uncomfortable, that's part of the point of challenging convention, because we also have to be willing to challenge our own conventions. When I was talking with Jacques early on about his own Jewish identity and where he connects with this, this was even before we had thought of him for a colloquium, he describes his sense of being secular as nothing is sacred. I can challenge everything, I can question everything, I can poke fun at anything. And if we're willing to take that attitude, that means we have to be able to laugh at ourselves, to look at ourselves, to criticize ourselves in the interest of change and growth. How do we learn? Do we learn by armchair philosophy, exploring the world within our mind? Do we use hard scientific investigation of the natural world and human society? Do we use a detailed study of the world of individual and group emotional experience? Of course, we use all of those. But in all of those endeavors, we learn through dialogue, comparing our ideas and our evidence and our experience with that of other people. Dialogue appears in the philosophy of Socrates and Plato. Dialogue is key to the scientific process of hypothesis, experiment, and review. Dialogue is the heart of Martin Buber's philosophy of I and thou relationships. Dialogue is the traditional Jewish model of Chavruta Talmud study, where two sets of eyes and two ideas provide new insight, even from the same text. Dialogue and dispute is the basis of that old joke about 2 Jews and 3 opinions, which secular Jews have expanded to 2 Jews, 3 opinions, 4 political parties, and 5 coalitions to protest 6 causes.
What about 7?
All out of what?
7 schools.
And 7 synagogues, and you can make your own 12 days of Christmas. That's right. Or 8 days of Hanukkah, maybe. Now, one of the best parts about Colloquium are the conversations. So we're going to explore these questions together. I want to start asking questions, but before I do that, I want to introduce the new members of our panel, some of whom you have not met. I welcome back, of course, Ben Biber and Miriam Jerris and Judith Seid, who each were ordained by our institute, and also Rabbi Eva Goldfinger, who is also ordained by our institute and works in Toronto. It's a great pleasure to have them as my colleagues and as my friends on this panel to explore these hardest questions for who we are and what we do. So the first question I want to ask, and on some level it gets back to that issue we debated earlier, how critical to be of the other, of the religious. Are they the other? Is that them language that sets up an opposition and antagonism? The question we ask in our publicity, and I know publicity is for attention-getting, but it's still worth answering the question, is organized religion a force for good or evil? The secular world is generally very critical, and there are certainly plenty of inquisitions to go around if you need evidence. But any theory of religion also has to account for a Gandhi or a Martin Luther King Jr. Now, in a battle of book subtitles, does religion poison everything, as Christopher Hitchens would have it, or should non-believers take religion seriously, as Jacques Berliner-Blau would have it? Is organized religion a force for good or for evil?
Yes.
Yes. That was my answer. Next question.
Would anyone like to expand?
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I can do yes too, but so this is something that I cover in the book. In my book, I do the first chapter on whether we should, whether we can be good without God, just getting that out of the way. And I do the why, and I do the how, and I also do the history as the second chapter, history of humanism, going back to the East and West. But I have a fifth chapter out of the 6 chapters in the book that is on humanism and interfaith, humanism and pluralism. Whether you can be good with God, and the answer is yes. But really the idea that we need to get involved in the discussion of interfaith matters and the world of religious pluralism without sacrificing or compromising any of who we are. And I think that we can do that. And I'm going Sunday night, I'm flying to Chicago for a very, very large conference of an organization called the Interfaith Youth Corps, which is an organization founded by a man named Ibu Patel, who is a religious Muslim with a tongue ring, and among other things. And Ibu was just named, very deservedly so, by U.S. News and World Report as one of the top leaders in America. And he has created this interfaith organization which draws hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of young people, and he's very open about the fact that 1 out of every 5 of the people that come to his meetings is non-religious. And it's just sort of, he doesn't really instinctively think to include them, but he is a smart guy and a very considerate guy, and he's learned to include them. And so they've been very good about sort of asking me in the last couple of years to be more and more of a resource for them, and asking the humanist community in general to be more and more of a resource for them. And I think that, it's also an answer to another question, which I hope we'll get to later, which I might have a couple comments on, which is the what should we do? Rather than just talking about what we believe, even, what we don't believe, what we do believe, but what do we do? I think that getting involved in interfaith work, not just dialogue, you tell me, right, that's sure when you say, you tell me your platitude and I'll tell you my platitude. We can share platitudes, right? But interfaith service work, interfaith education work, interfaith work against poverty, to defend the environment. These are the kinds of things that the IFYC does, and they're the kinds of things I think we need to raise our hand and say, we as the humanist community are dedicated to being part of this, and we will be part of this alongside you, and that way you can learn about us, we're willing to learn about you. And it's both a solution to making the world a better place and to strengthening our own community.
Great. Anyone else want to respond? Please.
It depends on how you're going to define organization, of course. So I would say that an organization in and of itself is neither a force for good nor evil. However, if there are people who organize specifically, once you have a leader and you've got followers, and the intention of that organization is to create unity where everybody is required to be the same and there's only one right way to be, then I would say it will ultimately lead as a force for evil, even though that may not have been its original intention, and it sees unity as good rather than evil. But for those of us who don't agree with that, it'll ultimately be the reduction of our rights and our ability to choose.
Of course, authoritarian secular regimes have the same movements, have the same problem.
Anyone else want to?
Well, actually, let me dig a little deeper on that. So, the real problem, of course, with a religion, to the extent a religion is problematic, is both an authoritarian or totalitarian worldview, absolutist worldview, that claims that there are a set of answers that are to be accepted, spread, and hence the danger, of course, authoritarian or totalitarian, absolutist, secular regimes. By the way, those wouldn't be humanists. Although you can certainly see there are some kinds of humanism that have a degree of hubris in them, and presumptuous, and Napoleon's universalism, I think you could say, was a little dangerous, as can be American imperialism. But the truth of the matter is that we can also see in religion some of the earliest paths that lead to humanism and lead to secularism that we are building on. And it's important to recognize that those elements are also there, that we are trying to draw out. In fact, I would say in our Jewish path, we are trying to take some of the very best elements of our tradition, of our culture, and use those both as an affirmation that we celebrate together and as a way of struggling with the worst elements in our culture, the authoritarianism, the sexism, the ethnocentrism, etc. And that is part of what we are doing, and going beyond that kind of absolutism to create a kind of a pluralistic and self-correcting, self-critical kind of Jewish path, and a path that is one that we are trying to join up with many other paths together to make this world, survive and thrive.
Okay.
Please.
I usually don't say any things about religion in public, but I think it is not only the authoritarian nature of it, and I'm thinking particularly of Western religion, which is what affects us in North America most. It is that there is this threat. And the threat is coupled with a pervasive feeling that it is good to believe 3 impossible things before breakfast. So, to make a person credulous is, I think, a great evil. And to make a person credulous with the threat that if you are not, something terrible will happen to you and your family is even worse. And in this sense, Western religion makes people mean and stupid. And although I have to say that some of my best relatives by marriage are religious, I think it is possible for good people to be religious, but I think it's harder for them than it is for us to be good.
I also want to say that some very religious people who happen to be my relatives are really smart. I just don't understand why they believe it.
When Judy emailed me back, I sent out a list of questions we were going to talk about. She said, "Are you really going to make me say that religion makes people stupid?" And I said, right. And I said, well, as long as you understand that the other side of the discussion are all those people in the Orthodox world saying, "Ugh, Einstein, if only he'd done Talmud." You can argue it both ways, please. Savannah, then Rob.
It's just an anecdote. Some of my family,
Which doesn't come out this thing.
some of my relatives also are ultra-Orthodox. One of them...
This is like some of my best friends are Jewish.
And one of them is a person who made Aliyah in the 70s from Russia. He was a very big and important engineer in Moscow. He was responsible for all the street lights in Moscow. There was only one. And he made Aliyah, and after sitting in prison for quite some time in Russia, and he chose to live an ultra-Orthodox life in Israel. And we haven't seen him for a few years. And one day I come home, I go towards my parents' house, and I see an ultra-Orthodox man standing outside the gate. Now you have to understand it's not peculiar in Jerusalem, because in our little street, I live in the German colony, on one side of the street there's a yeshiva, so you see lots of ultra-Orthodox people in that street, and you also have a Ashkenazi synagogue, and a Sephardi synagogue, and a Turkish synagogue, and there are only about 20 houses in that street. Anyway, so this ultra-Orthodox man stands in front of the gate, and I look at him and I think, you know, what does he want? I mean, what has happened? And I look him over and I see that his shoes are not regular shoes, they're Crocs, you know, black Crocs, which is not the ultra-Orthodox way of dress, but so already I understand there's something. I walk up to him and he says, Shalom, and he mentions my name, and I can sort of see under that attire that somebody that I once knew. And I asked him, you know, did you come to visit? He said, yes, but there are 2 more minutes and I didn't want to ring the doorbell. Anyway, we ring the doorbell, we go into my parents' home, and we sit down and we start talking. What do you do? What do you do? What do your kids do? Etc., etc. And then my father, who you all know, says to him, do you know what she does? And he says, no. What do you do? So my father says, she is a secular rabbi. So he looks at me, and he looks at my parents, and he does like this. Everything in the hands of the Lord.
I think this discussion raises a very serious issue for us, which has to do with the fact that on the one hand, we want to be generous and tolerant and sympathetic and appreciative even of practices and ideas that we totally disagree with. And on the other hand, we're not religious. And there are reasons why we're not religious. And I think Judy began to sort of articulate some of them. We could keep going, which I won't do. And it's important to underline that fact that there are reasons why we're not religious. And it gives us a kind of tension, which is between saying these practices are wrong, these ideas are wrong, the forms of behavior that they engender are wrong, they're destructive to individuals, they're destructive in a wider way, but I still respect you to religious leaders. And I think that's not so easy, because it's easy to then take the next step and dismiss, attack, reject, and be superior to believers. And the question for all of us is how do we, and not just in some abstract way, but how do we in our own practice see where we can find common ground, figure out how to disagree in a way that is respectful and yet honest. And how do we avoid simply turning our back as we have seen many times other people's back turned on us?
Ron, that puts me in mind of an interesting discussion in Dale McGowan's book, Parenting Beyond Belief, which is about a B+, I'd say, in terms of the read, but it has a lot of interesting ideas, the most important of which, for this discussion, is he makes a distinction between respecting people's beliefs and respecting them as people.
Right, exactly.
And that those are two very different things. If someone has a belief that you think is totally crazy, to say, I respect your beliefs is dishonest. It's, in fact, it's patronizing, it's insulting to them. On the other hand, if you say, I don't agree with that belief, but I respect you as a person, that's at least affirming who they are, affirming their right to choose, even if they've made different choices. So I wanted to turn to a different question. This comes out of a number of questions that have come from the audience, and that has to do with the boundaries of our humanism, the boundaries of what's acceptable. On one hand, we've tried to focus on positive language. We like to say we are humanists and not. I came up with an acronym. It's SHAFBAD. Secular, humanist, atheist, non-theist, bright, agnostic, I forget what the other N is, free thinker. I lost track of all of them already. Putting them all into one word is crazy. So of course each group says, well, just call yourself this. We'd like to say, well, just call yourself humanist, it's positive. But others might say, I'm an atheist. So one question on the boundaries is, well, what if we are atheists? I mean, what if that may be the most accurate term to describe who we are? And sometimes the new atheists not the new atheists, but the new atheists, have a point. They do something important. They have a contribution to make. One of the questions from the audience was, why do they have to be on different bookshelves? Can't they be on one bookshelf, and I use this at this time, and I use a different book at a different time? Aren't they all part of the exploration of who we are? So that's on one end of the spectrum. On the other end of the spectrum, I got a question just before the session that said, do we need to be exclusively focused on science and rationality as the only way to explore the human experience? What about emotional experience? What about things that are not yet fully verified or explained by science, but people still experience? Are we only rationalistic, only scientific, only what you can verify with actual facts? There was a school in philosophy called logical positivism. It's something that I never heard about growing up at the Birmingham Temple. And I went to college. In my senior year, I took a class on the philosophy of religion. And the lecturer talked about this failed school of philosophy called logical positivism that collapsed about 15 years ago. And it was like the 10th grade philosophy class I took with Sherwood. I mean, it was logical positivism, this idea that the only thing that's true is what you can verify with science and facts, and that's the only way you can understand the world. And the problem was you couldn't prove that only using science and facts. It had a self-referential problem. So that's another boundary edge of our humanism. Where do we define that? And finally, and this came up again in a number of questions, we're building temples. We're ordaining rabbis. We're holding services. Who are we serving? We're holding services. Isn't this like a religion? Or as Ron put it in his book, aren't we meeting the needs that religion meets? Now, we had a fascinating issue of our journal, Humanistic Judaism, about 6 years ago. It was on, is humanistic Judaism a religion? And so there were arguments on both sides. On one hand, we meet the needs religion meets. We need our 501c3 status, so we don't want to question that. But I raised the question in my article. There's a traditional phrase that the words of Torah were given in the language of human beings. And the idea is that if it's imperfect, it's because you're understanding it wrong, but God meant it right. In my sense, the language of human beings is the way people use language, what they mean by it. It's an imperfect tool, we all know that. But if when someone says, I'm religious, do we know what that means? Well, we can quibble. We can say, well, we're religious by dictionary definition number 3. But if you poll 9 people out of 10 on the street, or 99 people out of 100 on the street, you're going to hear religious has something to do with God. And so it's not so simple to say, yes, we're a religion, yes, we're religious. Just like someone doing something religiously is generally with a sense of awe, a sense of obligation, a sense of supernatural connection. Do we do things religiously with that sensibility? Maybe watch The West Wing when that was on television. I do that religiously, but even there we know we're joking. Now, the article came out, it was very well received, and then my mother-in-law made an interesting point to me. She said, yes, that is you still. She said to me, okay, you want to focus on the way people ordinarily use language. What do most people think of when they think of a rabbi? I said, Now, I know the original meaning is teacher. I know that it doesn't have to be an authoritarian model. You can be an authority without being authoritarian. I know that it has functions today of pastoral counseling and leading a community and teaching and everything else. But again, you ask 9 people out of 10 on the street, what do you mean by rabbi? The word God is going to show up somewhere in that definition. So this is our question. How do we draw boundaries around our humanism? If we're doing things in religious structures, is that trait? Is the structure itself too religious, too authoritarian, too foreign to a true humanist philosophy? On the other hand, are we going to be so dogmatic in our belief system that we don't use the tools that we have at our disposal, even if they use language we wouldn't choose to use as the so-called new atheists would choose to do? It's a long question. But I'm curious. Your answer? Yes. Yes, again? Oh.
I'm going to do that because I am outside the boundary you drew of we. In my background, I'm an old left secularist. I'm a 3rd-generation secularist. My grandparents were big secularists. My parents were big secularists. We're secularists. My children are secularists. We don't have auditorium-style seating. We stand around a table. We sit in a circle. And we don't have what you're calling a congregational setting. We have what serves exactly the same needs, and we tend to call community. The theme of this colloquium is challenging convention. I have to say that I have challenged the convention of my tradition by accepting the title rabbi, by getting up in front of people and telling them stuff. So, can you rephrase your question so I can close?
I've heard a lot of questions as I've been working on the book about, so are you talking, I hear you're talking about humanism. Are you talking about religious humanism or secular humanism? Yes.
Yes.
Or no. Because, to me, this distinction is so irrelevant. And are we a religion or are we not a religion? I mean, it's completely irrelevant. You could come up with sociological definitions that say one thing, practical definitions that say another. Why? Why do we have to agree? Why? Because, we know that we were not given a perfect way to be by a perfect deity, right? We know that we're here as a product of 14, 15 billion years of unguided evolution. So why would our way of expressing ourselves and our way of being in a community and our way of being in a movement not have evolved naturally as well? Right? So why would we think that there wouldn't be all these different mutations? I mean, it's a natural part of what we believe, that we would have many, many different ways of expressing ourselves, many different ways of wanting to do something about our beliefs, many different ways of wanting to come together. And that's what I'm more concerned about. About moving forward. It's just sort of let's find some of the best ways of doing this, grow them, and it's not worth the energy to say you're doing it wrong.
I think that you've made an important point, and you're not the only one that feels excluded when we use a particular formulation for how we come together. And because I do what I do, and my job is to travel from one community to another congregation, I see the different models. And I see the different levels of establishment when a community, a group, a number of people come together and start exploring what is this idea of secular humanistic Judaism, and it feels right to me. But now what are we going to do with that? And how do we come together with other people? And I am talking about you guys. And how do we come together and form a community? This is a group of people from Columbus, Ohio, who are just starting this exploration. And what I found, and when we talked about numbers, and you talked about it yesterday, we are so small in so many ways that if we don't keep enlarging the definition and including more models, and the model of Judaism your way, and I've talked to the rabbi in Boulder, I talked about that when I was doing my Humanist Institute studying in the middle and early 80s, and having a center. So I think we just need to be open enough and not say this is how it's done, but how do you want to do it? What would be meaningful for you? What would feel right? What would enrich your life as a Jewish secular person? And then just work with all those different models. And it's difficult because the one that Adam's talking about, and the one by which he makes a living, is the one that costs the most money. So at some level, we have to find a way to support that and still make sure that other people who don't want to spend $1,800 to $2,000 a year on synagogue dues get their needs met as well. So, I mean, again, I'm asking more questions, except that I see it, so I feel it, and I know how people come to it, so I just think that there's a way to do it all.
One of the challenges is when you're looking at getting a presence in the Jewish world, and Jacques spoke very eloquently Friday night about the fact that we don't have the presence that we really deserve, either by numbers, however you slice them, or by the power of our ideas. And the question is, how do you get a bigger presence? Is it by having 7 chavurot that are 15 to 20 people that can stand in a circle? Or is it by having one congregation that the circle is going to be too big to fit in any building? And then it feels just as unintimate as rows in a synagogue setting. This is the dilemma of growth. I mean, let's say you make something successful. It's a warm and successful community. This happened in the Chavurah world 40 years ago. They make warm, welcoming, exciting, creative, dynamic communities that then want to close their membership because they're too big. And so then they maybe try and start another group. Doesn't have the same dynamic, but I want the main group. I want the real group. So you're always stuck in this back and forth between the warm, intimate community and the trappings of congregation. Do we get caught up on language? Well, sometimes we do. Do we get caught up on structure? Sometimes we do. And do we get caught up on definitions? Absolutely. One question that came in from the audience as we were going through this discussion, even without soliciting questions from the audience, we're getting questions from the audience. The question is, how do you strike that balance between Judaism and humanism? Does our Jewishness separate us from the general humanist world? On the other hand, if we're doing too much Jewish, does it turn off the non-Jewish members, including the spouses of many of our members? How can we appeal to them as well? This is one of our perennial dilemmas, and the question of welcoming people into the synagogue that Karen talked about is not just a question of not treating them poorly. It's also, hopefully, a question of attracting them. So how do we serve those non-Jewish members in a way that both maintains helpful connections to the general humanist world, but also gives them something to do so they can feel like it's their community too, and not just an activity they're doing for their spouse? Lori, please.
Well, this isn't what I was... Okay, now we're on. This isn't originally what I was going to address of your longer question, but...
Whatever you want to say.
But having a spouse, a partner who's not Jewish, and having him have been a member of a synagogue that didn't require him to convert, I guess it depends on what... I mean, he never felt that it shouldn't be Jewish. He was walking into a synagogue, so they're going to sing the songs, and and the fact that in the sermons the rabbi was an activist and he always talked activist language, that's what drew him there. And he knew there was going to be the singing, and he got to like the singing. So, I mean, I don't think you change what you are. It's just why are the people coming to you? And I guess my point is, for a lot of people, and I heard this in what Karen said, social justice might be the key component. And everything that drew my family to the various organizations they joined, the Unitarian Universalists in the 60s, some of the other groups, was the hub of social justice. That's where the activists came, and people would come and talk to the activists and meet, and they would have their meetings at these places. When your temple is the hub of that activist work, people come in, I would think.
As many of you already know, I like to get clear definitions of everything before we talk, because otherwise we're using a word and people don't know what we mean. So you ask about, are we a religion, are we not a religion? All of that stuff seems to me to be completely secondary to who I personally see the entire motivation for humanistic Judaism and secular humanistic Judaism or secular Judaism, or whatever you want to call it. So what we argue about are vehicles. So how are we going to organize in order to do whatever it is that we think we need to do? What are we going to call whatever it is that we need to do? And I think we spend an enormous amount of energy on arguing about exactly those things, and those are the vehicles. And I would say that all vehicles are useful, provided they go to where the people are and what the people's needs are. So I can't help being a therapist when I try to use my role as a rabbi and say, okay, so what are the needs of people? And even social action is just a vehicle. So invariably, wherever I look, what I discover is that what people are looking for are, how do I feel good? Where can I go? What can I do? What can I believe that makes me feel good about who I am, where I'm accepted as who I am, where I can be who I am without any pretense? And what can I say, do, that makes me feel good about my contribution to the world? It's not like everybody needs to do social action. A lot of people are not interested in social action, but everybody's interested in feeling good about themselves. And making a difference, being able to say, I am significant, is what makes people feel good. So I see our role as humanists, as Jews, it is to tie them to the history of what we've done in the past to make ourselves feel good living in this world. And as humanists, I see us doing what is required to make people feel good within the Jewish context, within that Jewish history, and that line of evolution, as Karen so nicely put it, we're always evolving, in making a contribution to their present world and to being able to say, I'm leaving a world where I'm not nervous that my kids are going to be able to live a decent life. And if 3 million other people feel good because of that too, all the better. So I think that we need to focus more on what are we bringing to the people, not how we're bringing it to them.
So I wanted to shift gears a little bit and ask a question that has come up again and again, even this weekend, before this weekend, after this weekend, I think for the rest of my life. I hope not, but maybe. And that is, if there are so many secular Americans, and there are so many secular Jews, what are we doing wrong that we are still so small? And as a subset of that question, if there are all these Jews out there in all of these areas that are very secularized, they're not self-identified capital S secular, they're lowercase s secular. Maybe their primary commitments are to causes. Maybe it's left-wing politics, or environmentalism, or universalist humanism, or LGBT issues, or whatever their cause may be. Is that a good place to grow? I mean, is that where all those secular Jews are that we're not finding, that we're not reaching? And how do we encourage them in two directions? One is, we first have to encourage them to take being Jewish seriously enough to explore being Jewish. And secondly, we have to then convince them that we're the best fit for them, which we may be, but they may not buy it. So that's sales, and so it's both the marketing of creating the need, explain to them how, in fact, their lives could be better with this, and then secondly, sealing the deal with the sale and choosing our products as opposed to anyone else's. Now, it's very crass to speak about marketing, but it works, and we have to think about it in that way. And if your market share is too small, if 16% of American Jews are secular in the sense that we really mean secular, we are not 16% of American Jews. And so there's a disconnect between the target market and the sales success. And so how do we change that? Do we need to do more activism? Is it getting out there and doing environmental protests along with every other Jewish group that are doing environmental protests? Or is that not going to be distinctive enough to make our message clear? How do we find them, and how do we make it more relevant to who they are?
Well, part of what we're asking people to do, obviously, in many different organizational forms, is to make some sort of commitment. And there are some people who are more inclined to make commitments for a variety of reasons. We see clearly the greatest numbers of people who join our organizations are in some chapter of life that tends to incline them to connect with a community. So many of our members are households with school-aged children. Many of them are in their later years who are looking for community in another chapter of life. And we find other particular subsets of groups that are looking to make a commitment to a community, to be a part of a community. And there's a commitment of resources that we're asking for as well, as you point out. Whether we think of these as businesses, nonprofit organizations, what have you, they have certain functions in people's life, and there are economies that are involved in the operation of these organizations. My own sense is that one of the things that I was just talking with Greg about this, is that we don't talk much about the concept of covenant. And yet I think it's particularly a useful concept in that we have no covenant idea with a deity, but what we have is a sense of a covenant among us that we actually have the power to make a better world, to make communities that add quality and depth to our lives, that challenge us, that help us to grow and to heal, and have so many other functions, and to offer us ways of learning. And I think that we have got to really find, through, if you will, kind of community needs assessments, background in social work, what can I say? That, what are people coming for? What do they pay for? What's their commitment about? And focusing in on that. Now, it's clear it's different in different communities. Mahar, I'm happy to say my congregation in D.C. has a lot of people who enjoy doing some degree of activism together, who enjoy also talking about social issues. That they often then do their activism or community efforts in other places, but they can still come together to talk about immigration reform, or they can talk about healthcare issues, though we do work on those issues. The commitment piece is an important piece that we have to understand within our communities, the different commitments that people are willing to make and do make, and build on those. There's another aspect, though, which is the searching, that all of us found ourselves here and connected to a variety of communities because of our own searches. Now, some of us were luckier, Judy, to be born, but you still had to search for what was most meaningful for you in that path, that you would still commit yourself, and you found things there, and you invented things there that others were searching for, and that you helped to draw them in. But I think that, and Karen, we were talking a little bit about a kind of spirituality that is often in the public discourse in tension with religiosity. Religiosity being a more conserving aspect, if you will, and spirituality being a more exploratory and inventive discourse. We are, in many ways, offer a new exploratory path and an inventive path. And we have to acknowledge that that is something that many people are searching for. And I hate to say it, but we have to be careful to maintain a quality and originality in what we do, and be careful of simply taking this, a little bit of this and that, and slapping it together. And it doesn't have an integrity, it doesn't have a quality. You know good music from bad music, you know what you like. But you also know that was amazing. And we have among us so much of depth and quality and beauty. And we have to be very careful to put that out there so that many people who are searching find that. And I know we're making the effort, but we have to keep in mind both the searching and commitment aspects, because they're somewhat in tension. There are people who are going to search, find us, and not make a full commitment just yet. It may take a while to move from secularization to secularism, from a sense of what is humanistic in the path that they were on, to the kind of humanism which has a kind of greater ideological and philosophical consistency to it that we're trying to put out there.
Right. Sabat.
I want people that I have some connection with. Some people that we have some connection with. To find a home in what we're doing, not necessarily after I have explored with them the most intimate set of beliefs or their ability to articulate philosophically their ideology. That may take time. I want them to come into a setting that we create and to feel immediately at home. And I keep asking myself, how do we do this? I mean, we all do, but I believe, it's not knowledge, it's belief. I believe that we have an amazing vehicle. I don't share it with everyone here, I know that. But I'm not trying to be popular right now. I'm trying to tell you what I believe. And I believe in using the Bible. And I am a strong believer in that. Not only the Torah, but the Bible. And this has been a common, I don't know if the right termination is a common denominator of old Judaisms in our history and also currently. And some use it more, some use it less, but that is a common denominator. And within it, there are things I would probably not use. I don't feel confined to the weekly portion in the sense that I have to read every portion. I can choose, but I don't think we have the liberty to take the Bible out of our texts. We do, we lose the most important core and common denominator. That's the pool.
It's interesting. For all of Sherwin's reputation of a radical criticism of the Bible and dropping it, he spent a lot of time every week in a Bible class. And he was teaching it as literature, as a source of history, as a primary document in Jewish civilization. So it's not that we don't use it. The question is how we use it, of course, in what setting, and how often we use it. And so in this case, the question becomes the balance. Now, I actually sympathize with Savan's perspective on this. I do like a sense of Jewish literacy, so that you get the jokes. You can't read the modern Hebrew poetry from Israel without knowing the stories behind it. You can't read Philip Roth or Saul Bellow without knowing the stories behind it. You're missing the jokes because you don't have the background to get it. We need Jewish literacy, which begins with the earliest Jewish book, but Sherwin's point was also valid. You know, you're right and you're right. That we can't limit it to only books that were written by the year 200 BCE, with the Book of Daniel. That there's so much Jewish literature and literacy and creativity since then that also often the Bible overshadows the other ones. It came first, it provides the foundation, but if we only focus on that, then in the end it's abstract. And also, frankly, again, in terms of outreach to people, in the Israeli setting, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, is the basis for the national literature. But in the American setting, the Bible is one of many sources, and the Jewish Bible is not the only source. It's the Christian Bible, really. That's the model. So the parable of the fishes and the loaves, or the parable of the prodigal son, that is as biblical in the American setting as Abraham and Isaac and the so-called binding or sacrifice of Isaac, depending on which source you're reading. So one of the questions we got from the audience was, I'm a third or fourth generation American. We've been here for a long time. We don't even know how long we've been here. Why can't I just be a good American? What do I need to do that's Jewish? And in fact, if you start throwing Bible at me, especially if I have this non or even anti-religious bent to begin with, I have no interest in a Bible class. Now, you can maybe convince them to get more literate later, but that's the selling process again. The question is, how do you get them in the door so that you can start the selling process and then get to the Bible in less than 17?
Well, they paid to come here, actually. So.
Well, this particular person, yes, they paid to come here. Fabulous. That's always step one. And I always laugh when rabbis complain about the rabbis that don't show up, and about the Jews that don't show up in synagogue.
Yeah.
Because they're talking to the ones that are there.
Stop parade.
Yeah, stop parading the people that are there.
Regarding the Bible stuff, many of you were here for the Colloquium with Ari Elan, Professor Ari Elan, who's now unfortunately returned to Israel. But he talks about the expression.
That's the inversion of diaspora, right? Too bad he went back to Israel.
Oh, he lost him as a teacher. As a teacher is what I'm saying. It was wonderful learning with him. But he said that there are two types of people who deal with the Torah. There are Torah lawyers and there are Torah lovers, and we want to be Torah lovers. But I did want to speak to your question. And what was your question?
Why don't they know we're here?
Well, which one of the questions? Was it the young people coming, or you remember them?
Yes, I do. It's the young people, but I forgot my answer.
Okay, I want to ask you an important question that gets back to the composition of the panel and the issue of welcoming and community and focus. Where does a secular libertarian Jew go?
Yeah.
Okay?
Of what age?
Call the dot.
Anywhere from 30 to 70. This is one of the dilemmas that we have as a movement on that question of what are we doing? You know, what do you do to get people to come? If the focus is social justice, the question is always what counts as justice? And is this a community of celebrating Jewish culture and politics is separate? Or is this a community whose self-identity is in the social action sphere, which includes all of the checklist of progressive politics like immigration reform, healthcare reform, and everything else? This is why I was very glad in Lori's presentation. She highlighted the fact that the secular values are not synonymous with the Democratic Party. And so the question becomes, if secular Judaism becomes synonymous with the Democratic Party, or with the Socialist Party, or with the left end of political activity in every sphere, including Israel issues, is that a problem in finding a home for all those potential adherents of our approach to Jewish life?
I do remember what I wanted to say.
Okay, do that.
Our generation of parents really spoiled our children. We gave them everything, and it was at their fingertips. And I think that to some degree, no matter how hard we tried, our children developed a sense of entitlement, as if it's their due to have everything they need in as much abundance as is possibly out there. So what happened with the younger generation is they're not so willing to pay for those things that we think they ought to have. They'll pay $50 or $150 or $200, I don't even know where they get the money, but $200 for concert tickets, but they're not prepared to pay $150 per annum as a membership fee to an organization. And of course that could be because what we have to offer within the walls, whatever kind of walls those may be, unless you're doing it in the park, I mean the congregational stuff in the park, that's not what they're looking for. So I think that we mistake the idea that if we don't get them inside our building, we're not being effective. So when you say, how do we get them inside so that we can say they belong and that they're members, because we're thinking money. The things that we're offering them in the format that we're offering it in an organizational format costs money, and they need to pay for it, and they don't think that what we have to offer is what they're looking for. And yet individually as rabbis and as leaders on a one-on-one basis, we get to influence thousands of people with the idea of humanistic Judaism, who in turn exponentially will influence all kinds of other people with the idea of humanistic Judaism. So our reach, if our intention is to develop these ideas, these humanistic ideas and secular ideas of how the world needs to run, we're doing a much better job than you can possibly imagine than by simply using the measure of how many people come inside our building. So although because it all costs money, and you know I work very hard to bring the people inside the building, I don't think we should judge our success by how many people come inside that building.
But I mean, you talk about the concert that they're willing to pay money for, and why don't we bring the concert to us? I mean, that's to me, I've seen this time and time again, where I mean, I've seen humanist and humanistic Jewish events that are more successful on a practical level in terms of number of people attending and that sort of thing than the religious alternatives that are available. And I've helped organize them, and it's not because of something that I bring, but I do a lot of recruiting, not of the people to attend the event, but of the people to perform. I mean, we need to do a lot of recruiting of great art and music and dance and drama and literature and cinema and all this sort of thing. And every time I've seen us do this, we draw people by droves. What we do, I think, is we need to talk to people who are creating great art, who I think, just as we sometimes feel this disconnect of, well, we're putting together this great community, but is it really reaching people on a deep level? Artists feel that way too. And we have something to offer them by saying, look, let us take your art and put it in the context of a set of ideas that really matter to people and that really keep people going on a day-to-day level. And it's not just about consuming one movie or one concert or whatever, but it's about something bigger than that. And if we can combine those two things, and I've seen this, we brought in somebody who most of you probably haven't even heard of, but his name is Joss Whedon. And he's a television writer and director to Harvard. And all we had to do was send out an email. And we sold 1,000 tickets 19 days before the event. And we would have been able to fill a convention center for Joss Whedon. But it was Joss Whedon talking about humanism. And so we put together a clip show of Joss Whedon's TV moments that are really just expressions of humanist philosophy. And by the way, you can see it at newhumanism.org. The event is there. And it was just wonderful because it was people being able to say, this is my hero, but they could hear their hero talking about something more than just a fleeting moment of television, but something that could matter to them for the rest of their lives. And to me, again, that's what we have to do. And we also just have to acknowledge, though, that talking about culture, styles of art are styles of culture, and different people have different styles. And if you're going to really bring something in that say, this is the music that's really going to capture some people, and it's going to be great, not a lukewarm example, but a great example, well, that's going to drive away as many people as it's going to bring in. Because for every person that's a Joss Whedon fan, you're going to have the people that hate him, and every person that's going to love, Aidan Reichel. And believe me, there are droves that love him and droves that hate him, right? You're going to drive people away, but we have to make that sacrifice, and just say, look, all right, we're not going to bring in new art.
So, along the lines of the question of the libertarian Jewish location, where do they go? What about right-wing secular Jews? Consider the Russian immigrants in Israel. One of the interesting phenomena that I saw beginning when I was in Israel for the first Tomorrow Our Nation conference was the beginning of a secular caucus in the Knesset, which had two founding members, one from Meretz, from the right-wing or the left-wing party, and one from Yisrael Beitenu, which is the party of Avigdor Lieberman, a party for Russian immigrants, but also tends to be right-wing on political issues, but is secular because it's reflecting the interests and the lifestyle of the Russian immigrant population. So we've talked a little bit about the issue of Israel. We're going to certainly talk about it tomorrow, but we didn't get a chance to hear from Jacques about the J Street phenomenon of this transition, which I think on some level does raise the question for us. If we're synonymous with all these other liberal causes and identities, is there something distinct for us? Or is this phenomenon of J Street changing the game when it comes to Israel issues such that we have to be able to respond to the new circumstances? So Jacques, I'd love your thoughts.
One thing I warned about in earlier writings...
It's on.
Sorry.
It's on, actually.
Then try this one.
Can you hear me?
This works better.
Does it? Yeah? Can you hear me? One thing I warned about in earlier writings was I had noticed that secularism, liberalism, and the Democratic Party had become perfectly overlapping circles. And it really concerned me in terms of developing an organic secular identity. And one of my prescriptions about 5 years ago was that secularism had to really disentangle itself from liberalism and the Democratic Party, if only to see where it could go and where it couldn't have gone over the last decade or so. Luckily, the Democratic Party did it for you. The Democratic Party, Lyndon Baines Johnson once said, if your grandma's ugly, get her out of the living room, right? And this is exactly what Obama and crew did to secularists in the 2008 presidential election. They literally moved all church and state issues off of their public speaking tours. Now, a lot of people, when Obama announced the shout-out to non-believers, it seems to me that every secularist in America got an erection lasting more than 4 hours. It was an empty gesture, and quite frankly, in terms of danger to secular America, I'm interested in hearing what you think. I think the Obama administration is much more dangerous. Yes. Right? And I have nothing against Obama. You know that I have this principle of neutrality where I don't vote in elections and I write about them. So you can trust me. That's a big part of my work as a scholar. I want people to trust in what I say. I say not because I'm invested or being paid to say it. As I look at the Obama administration, and there are many things I like about it, by the way, there's one thing that I see going on stealthily underneath the surface is this Office of Faith-Based Initiatives, which you're all over, and it is lethal what is going on over there. While all of you are looking at healthcare and Afghanistan and Iraq and the imploding economy, they are quietly setting in place, I think, not only procedures, but governmental offices that will dismantle many of our cherished church-state liberties. All right, I'm going to say one more thing and then pass it on to Lori. On J Street, because you wanted me to speak about J Street, in Washington, it has been the tensest 3 weeks I can ever recall. I have never seen Jews going at one another like this. The last time I can recall were the who is the Jew debates prior to the Second Intifada, which quieted down pretty fast, but got pretty nasty pretty fast. A reporter from the Jerusalem Post asked me what I thought was going on there. And I noticed 3 vectors, and we've all mentioned it in our presentations here. The first is there's clearly a generational divide in American Judaism, which is not being looked at. I regret to say I'm noticing the generational divide looking at the audience. And I've been desperately asking behind the scenes, why is that, Adam? Explain that to me. Where are the young folks here? I'm a little bit worried about that. In a word, you're old, and I love you, all right? Don't take that as an insult, but I want to figure out where the young, middle-aged, 20-year-old secular Jews are. And this is the only thing about my trip to Birmingham which makes me nervous is that. Everything else I loved. I love being here. I love speaking with you folks. But that makes me very, very nervous. And that has to be addressed. The first vector is a generational gap in American Judaism, which Karen is very aware of, which we've known about for 10 years, and I do think the conversation has been suppressed. Demographers have been warning there is this horrific abyss generationally amongst Jews and what the younger generation thinks on these issues such as Israel, so on and so forth. No one's paid attention to it. The second major issue is there is an orthodox secular thing amidst all of this. The Buddhist satyrs remark, for those of you that have been following the whole J Street thing, there was an article by James Traub in the New York Sunday Times which set everybody thinking about it. And one kind of snarky, I guess it was a Likudnik, said something to the effect of, oh, they're all intermarrieds anyhow, all having their Buddhist Seder. Basically, screw them. We don't need them. They're not part of the Jewish equation. That's going to bubble up to the fore. The third shift is a generational shift. There's a secular Orthodox shift. There's also a right-left shift within Judaism. So just so you know, the conference is coming to Washington in about 2 days. There's a tremendous amount of sound and fury concerning it all. I regret to say that a person who worked with us at the program, Michael Oren, who is now the ambassador, refused the invitation. I know Michael, I know his wife. It must have been very, very difficult for him because Michael is a courageous and decent man. He is an intellectual of a very high caliber. And the Michael I knew before he was an ambassador was like any professor. We talk to anybody. We'll just listen to folks. What the hell? We'll lecture any group. That's the way we are because we're professors. Now, when he became an ambassador, clearly it wasn't the same thing. I do wish he had addressed J Street, by the way. I wish he went there and said, I really disagree with you guys. You guys are nuts. Whatever it was, right? I would have loved to have him say that. The best thing that I think that can come out of all of this is perhaps the fringe Jewish left and the fringe Jewish right can be moved more to the fringes. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a centrist, right? I find both those aspects of the Jewish community to be really, really annoying. And I know that upsets a lot of folks in this room, because some of you might be on one of those fringes. Nevertheless, that would be my dream of a result after this conference, that a sort of centering a Zionist big tent emerges where serious disagreements can be aired in a respectful, though perhaps aggressive manner. Then there are the folks way out on the extremes who I have the damnedest time relating to and understanding, but perhaps that's just me. I'm going to pass it on.
Talk about the
Okay, the White House Office of Faith-Based Initiatives. I have to disagree with you that the current administration is the worst ever. I do think there are things that are happening that are very bad in that regard. But when you say they're setting these things up, these things were set up under the previous administration.
They're expanding them.
They're expanding them. But I can't say it's the worst administration because they're not changing scientific studies to say that abortion causes breast cancer. They're not keeping the morning after pill away from people on theological grounds. They're not putting people into positions of power for no reason other than they're the right religion. So some things have changed drastically that make a different administration the worst ever for us, I believe. It's very frustrating because I was at some of those first meetings when the election was over and the new administration was not yet inaugurated. where they met, and they're still meeting with the Secular Coalition for America, the Baptist Joint Committee, which is also a church-state separation group, all of these groups, and listened to the reasons why you cannot allow religious discrimination with these funds. And it was one of the promises that Obama made that I don't think he's fulfilling. I mean, there's a lot of things that make me very upset. I mean, we still have don't ask, don't tell. How hard is it to undo that? You know, it's, oh, wait for the right time. And by the way, I want to clarify, when I say the hub of social justice, I'm talking about the humanism part of humanistic Judaism. I know there are secular Jews who are not humanistic, but I do think humanism, and by the way, I represented non-theists who were not humanists in my job at the Secular Coalition, and I respect that. That's not a problem for me. But when you are a humanistic group, I think that entails helping to feed the hungry and make sure there's equal family rights for all families and that sort of thing. So I guess I went in two different directions, but it's fine.
Well, Adam, if I can, I mean, actually, our just previous president of Mahar was libertarian. And now, he, truth be told, also was probably more of a business-oriented, but very socially liberal type of, if you want to use those words, maybe a left libertarian, I don't know what you want to call them. But the thing is, there are those of us who, in the movement, can see value in conservative ideas and think it's actually very helpful to have a diversity of voices to discuss things intelligently and try to draw all the best ideas together. And also, frankly, learn how to be civil with each other and understand that we are going to have to, in some ways, find, on whatever particular issue it may be, the best way forward together. And so whether it is understanding that, for example, on same-sex marriage issues, we're not going to demand that all clergy perform them. You know, if they don't want to perform them, hey, more business for us. That's all I can say. You know? And it's interesting to see that some of these right-wingers are going like, wow, you know, those log cabin Republicans, we really don't want to completely piss them off. And, by the way, it's good for business, all those same-sex weddings. So, I mean, it's a curious thing. It's much more complicated than simple right-left kinds of things. And honestly, I think that even some of the conservative Russians, for example, we've had them in our congregation. I know it's uncomfortable for people, but, you know, frankly, the truth is that we're Jews. We're going to disagree with each other anyway. You can get the smallest group, right? And they have principles they all agree on, and they're still going to argue. So just let's be nice, you know, to each other. And if we listen to enough different viewpoints, it may help us to actually grow, instead of just keeping our pure little whatever that we imagine is the little bubble that we want to live in. It just doesn't work that way.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin.
I call left libertarians Coloradans.
He's from Philly, but okay.
I just want to give you an example of a sort of post-denominational, out-of-the-box program that happened in Colorado, in Denver this summer that I participated in. I'm trying not to toot my own horn, but it shook my world. And it might be a useful example for people in the room. I work with storytelling, which is a Jewish ritual theater reinvented. And what we did this summer was free in the park, Shabbat Mincha, storytelling, dramatization of Parashat Shoftim, of the parasha about judges, eye for an eye. It's an ugly text. It's about capital punishment. And we dramatized a fictive dialogue between Ruthie Madoff and her sister Sandra, who got the shaft when she lost all of her money with Bernie. So that's just the story. And we did a line-by-line translation of the parsha with a fake Torah, whatever, it was fine. There were 8 rabbis in the audience. 3 were modern Orthodox. 1 was renewal. No, there were 2 renewal, 3 modern Orthodox, and then everything in between. There were 125 people in the park. We did no advertising except email. And it was free. And it was involving Torah. And it was totally out of the box. And there were people in the audience who I invited personally, who I know are resolutely secular and have not set foot in a shul, in a synagogue, for 20 years, and there were a ton of modern Orthodox young families with all their kids. And it was the most bizarre, amazing experience that I have ever participated in. So that's just one example of like partnering with organizations that you might not have anything in common with religiously, secularly, whatever, and doing things out of the walls of your institution, and advertising using technology, and going to where people hang out anyway, because that park is full of Jews on a Saturday afternoon. So just going where the people are. Go do stuff at the mall. You know? So, just
We do,
an idea.
we do Shabbat in a bar occasionally. Seriously, just bring candles. I got the woman.
I want to close with a comment about something that I take very personally, and that is when the discussion turns to young people. I'm almost always in that category. Not for long. It's only temporary. But it's an issue that I take very seriously. You know, okay, how do I put this? In 50 years from now, if this room were transported forward 50 years, it'd be a lot emptier. And so we need to deal with that issue. Now, the question of why aren't there younger people here at the Colloquium? I can give you a lot of sort of logistical reasons. You know, both parents are working, the weekends have to be spent with family, you're not living in the same town as the grandparents and the kids anymore, and so it's not easy to just dump them with the grandparents and then take off for a weekend somewhere. Airfares are expensive, the economy's in the tank. You can list all the issues. Some of it is a function of what they're interested in. And this kind of a weekend is long, is detailed, is very intellectual. Yes, it costs money, but also it's the kind of program that they might tune in for a bit. But 6 hours of lecture and discussion, and that seems like a flashback to college.
Are you podcasting this?
So here's the question. Right. So here's the question. Karen asked, are we podcasting this? Is this going to be available on the internet? So this is where we have to face the impact of the new media on young people. On one hand, it creates an environment of wanting to do anything in your underwear. In other words, you're in your room at 2 in the morning. I mean, that may exist for other people for other reasons. But you're sitting in your room at 2 in the morning. I want to experience a Yom Kippur service. Search, Yom Kippur service, watch the whole thing, fantastic. It may be December 31st, doesn't matter. I want to learn about the Torah portion of the week. Search, I got 5 different versions. I've got an audio, I got video, I got interactive, I got to learn how to read the portion out loud in Hebrew, I can learn how to read it out loud in Greek. It's all there. But also, it's almost all free. It's when I want it, where I want it, what I want, for the price I love to pay, which is nothing. So this is where we hit the dilemma. It's the balance between free samples and going out of business. You want to be able to get people attracted, to get them interested, to get them committed to the step they take where they put a price tag on it that they value. People do pay for things. They pay for concert tickets, they pay for opera tickets, they give donations to causes that they think are important. I don't predict that Amnesty International is going to help me anytime soon. I'm not just doing this for me. I'm doing it because I believe in the cause they represent, the services they provide. You know, all those secular gay and lesbian couples who are joining the synagogue they never go to. You know, it's ironic. The synagogue I never go to is the gay and lesbian synagogue. I mean, there's that style of you support the cause. So if they commit to it, they support it. So you can't simply say price for everything in this world, in the world of new media, in the world of young people who are maybe coddled. I do take that a bit personally. But certainly,
We did the
sure, and we accepted it gratefully.
Yeah, well, we're authoritarian disciplinarians now as parents.
Yes,
Watch out.
the transition to becoming a parent changes you entirely.
Watch out.
Anyways.
Iron fist.
The point is, I'll tell you what it said. The point here is, we can lament the loss of a sense of Jewish responsibility, the loss of a sense of organic community where everyone felt a responsibility to support the rabbi, to support the local synagogue, to support their cause, to join their institution. You move to a new city, you join a new synagogue, that's just what you do. You give the federation, it's automatic. We can lament that loss. We can demand a return to the past. But sort of like going to pray at the Wailing Wall, you're talking to a wall. It's not going to change anything. What you have to do is face the reality. You beat your head against the wall always. We have to face the reality of this new world that we're in. We have to give not everything away. We have to give more away. We have to make it easier. We have to make it more available. We have to make it more user-friendly. We have to make it more attractive. It's not just art and culture. It's art and culture that get people excited and committed. Now, the question of this colloquium, and that camera and that camera right over there. We're recording them for DVD sales. Is that the vehicle that young people are going to watch? Absolutely not. Is it a vehicle that older people might watch? Possibly. Is it a vehicle that a community might watch as an entree to a discussion program, where they show a session of a colloquium, you hear the discussion here, and you open it up to the audience and say, what do you think about that topic? We've got 8 colloquia out there on the table. We've got 12 hours of colloquium. You've got about 100 hours of community programming and discussions. Can you do that in a year? You can do that 1 a week and still do it for 2 years. So the point is we have the material out there. Communities can make it accessible in a way that people would want to see it. How do we make it accessible? Maybe you take the best 5 minutes and you make it a YouTube video.
Yep.
You take the best single question and answer session and put it out there as the sample. And then you make it available for sale, but easy. Download, credit card, PayPal, you get your money, but they get the product easy, fast. There's no patience anymore for print out this form and write a check and put it in the... Some people will do that. It's absolutely true. But we have to face the reality. And the reality is not just the faces in this room. Because you go to our communities, you will see young people. You will see families. You will see children. In fact, as Ben pointed out, most people join a community that has a school for the school. So it's not that they're not here, but it is that they're not experiencing the program. Because we're not making it available in a way that they can get it. This is our challenge moving forward to be relevant, is to speak to them where they are. This is what we always said we did. We're not telling you what you believe. We're not telling you what to believe. We're telling you what you already do believe. This is who you are. We're helping you find yourself. If that's the case, then we find them by making it easier for them to find us. I hope you've enjoyed this morning's and afternoon's sessions at Colloquium. It's been very exhilarating for me. I know we've explored fascinating topics. It doesn't stop now. We have a break, which is good. We have to break. That's human. No one can do this forever. But we will have a special celebratory dinner this evening in honor of our ordainees, who will be ordained at a special ceremony tonight. You are all welcome back for the Havdalah ceremony, which begins at 7:30. And tomorrow morning, bright and early at 9:30, we get to the heart of the matter. Not what American Jews think about what's happening in Israel. Or maybe not. Depends on you. They ask for it, not they ask for it. What did I say? Oh, I meant 9 o'clock. At 9 o'clock, don't be late. Don't come at 9:30. At 9 o'clock, Rabbi Sivan Malkin-Maz, the Dean of our Institute of Israel, will come to speak and to tell us how she and her cohort there and many Israelis of all stripes are challenging the traditional establishment of Israel, and then I'll try and pull it all together in our closing session. So again, Shabbat Shalom for the last few hours.